Hi everybody, this is Pastor Joshua Sullivan at Holy Cross Lutheran Church, Kerrville, Texas. Welcome back to ATP, Ask the Pastor. Today we've got two questions dealing with the same topic, cremation. Someone asks, Dear Pastor, should we be buried or cremated? If we're going to be brought back in the end times, what will happen to those who are cremated and their bodies are gone for good? Someone else asks, they say, Dear Pastor, I just wanted to thank you again for your ATP videos. Here's a topic for you when you have time. Cremation is becoming more and more common in our society, even among Christians. What does the Bible say about burial and cremation to provide Christians guidance in this decision? This is a question that's very apropos for our day and age because everyone, cremation is on the rise as far as its popularity and its availability, but also each one of us then faces our own mortality, and we have to make those decisions, and also then the mortality of our loved ones. And so it's good that we say something about this, I think, looking at it, like we said, from the questioner's perspective there. What does the Bible say about these sorts of things? What does our theology say about how we treat the dead? So let's get into this. The first question I always ask two questions. When somebody in the parish comes up to me and they say, Pastor, what do you think about cremation? Which means, hey, I'm planning on being cremated. Tell me what you think. I usually ask two questions. The first is, are you being cremated to show that you don't believe in the resurrection of the body on the last day? The second question is, what are you going to do with your remains afterwards? The first question I ask is because historically cremation was a pagan practice in a lot of different parts of the pagan world, and the first Christians, especially in the 2nd century AD, rejected the practice because it was a pagan principle, or pagan practice, and also just because of the cruelty and the destructive nature that it had upon the body. It also seems then that pagans, for pagans, cremation became a counter-confession against the resurrection of the body. In Greek thought, the resurrection of the body makes no sense whatsoever and would be an aberrant thought. And so a lot of pagans, it seems, were using cremation as a way of thumbing their nose at the Christians to say, basically, your God raises the dead. Okay, I dare you to raise me now that I'm a box of ash and crushed up bone bits and whatnot. Now, of course, God can raise that from the dead. We'll get more to that at the end of the video here. But that's why I ask folks, are you doing it to thumb your nose at the resurrection of the body? Now, I've been a pastor for almost 10 years as I make this video. And in almost 10 years, no one has ever told me, well, yes, Pastor, I'm doing that because I don't believe in the resurrection of the body. The resurrection of the body, both Jesus' body, and then he is the first fruits of the firstborn from the dead. This is a cornerstone of the Christian faith then. See 1 Corinthians chapter 15 then about this. If someone were to say, yes, that's the reason why I'm doing it, then we obviously have to take a few steps back, go through the scriptures a little bit more, instruction in the Christian faith, etc. then. Now the second question, what do you plan on doing with the remains, or the cremains, as some people call them, is to diagnose how they view the body and the rest of the body, the rest that the body enjoys after death then. Right up front, I tell people I heavily discourage people having their ashes scattered anywhere, in the forest, in the field, in the plain, in the river, anywhere. I don't care for that whatsoever. You wouldn't cut up a corpse and throw it in the river or in the woods or in a field. Why would you do that with the ashes and the remains of your loved ones then, or of yourself then? I counsel people that if they do choose cremation, they ought to have the urn buried at least. This has become extremely important now too, not just because you have people scattering ashes, but also you have more almost sick and grotesque things. A couple years ago, I was doing a funeral, and at the funeral home there was a brochure from a company that will take a portion of your loved one's ashes, a portion, and they will basically turn it into a diamond or some other precious stone, and you can have it put in a ring setting, or make earrings, or have a necklace, so you can keep your loved one close by all the time. There's a bunch wrong with that. But again, in both of these cases, I think the scattering of ashes and the turning a portion of your loved one's remains into a diamond or something like this, it shows a disrespect for the body that God created, sanctified, and redeemed. And that's precisely the sort of stuff we don't want to happen then. Now, some will say then, and upon hearing this, that this sounds a little bit duplicitous, to say, well, I allow for cremation, but I don't allow for the scattering of ashes and whatnot, out of respect for the created body then. Someone might say to that, well, isn't the idea, or isn't subjecting our bodies to flames and our bones to the crusher disrespectful of the body that God created, redeemed, and sanctified? And my answer would be, well, you've got to deal with a body somehow. Burning a body is grotesque. I agree. Personally, I don't plan on being cremated. However, modern embalming practice is, in my opinion, just as grotesque and just as damaging and devastating to the body. Then I would posit that one who thinks of cremation as more grotesque really isn't fully aware of the process by which we embalm, and also then the purpose of embalming. Modern embalming isn't designed to turn you back to dust, and we'll leave it at that. The only way to really do that, to go from body back to dust, is a burial without any sort of embalming. But then you're working up against a day to 2 or 3 days at the most before you've got to get the body into the ground, and each state's laws are different regarding the care for corpses and the deceased then. So in short, I'd say cremation is okay. It's really no more grotesque or devastating to the human body than modern embalming practices. Now, what does the Bible say about this? Well, in the Scriptures, looking at Hebrew culture, in the Scriptures we see in the Old and the New Testament, we see that the Hebrews didn't cremate their dead. They interned them into the ground, usually wrapped in a linen cloth with spices. Consider on Good Friday when Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus asked Pilate for the body of Jesus. What do they do with it? They wrap Jesus' body in fine linen cloths with spices, and then they go and they bury him in the tomb. The new tomb that Joseph of Arimathea had made then. Think of also what the women are doing on Easter morning in going to Jesus' tomb. They're going there to kind of finish the job of Nicodemus and Joseph. But again, there's no embalming of Jesus or really anyone in the Scripture that we know of. Now, timeout, caveat, there are 2 examples to the contrary. But then this I even think helps us out. There are 2 people in the Scripture that we know of who are embalmed, and that is the patriarch Jacob and his son Joseph in Egypt then. Jacob goes to Egypt to see his son Joseph because now he has the news that he lives and he rules Egypt, all of that sort of thing at the end of Genesis. As he approaches his death, Jacob wants to be buried in Canaan in the cave of Machpelah. This is the cave in Genesis chapter 25, I believe it is, where Moses bought the land from Ephron the Hittite so that he would have a place to bury his dead, Sarah. So what the patriarch is wanting to do is to be buried in the family plot. The only way to get his remains up there is to embalm him. And he's in Egypt, and when in Egypt, etc. then. Now, the same thing then happens to Joseph. Joseph, at the end of his life, on his deathbed, tells his sons, and this is in Genesis 50, 25 to 26, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. So Joseph died being 110 years old. They embalmed him, and they put him in a coffin. And that coffin was what the children of Israel carried with them into the promised land so that they could keep their word to the patriarch Joseph then. The reason I bring up the patriarchs here is to show that even embalming was not typical of the Israelites. Cremation was atypical, although it did happen. Saul, son of Kish, the first king of Israel, he was cremated, so to speak, after he committed suicide on the field of battle in 1 Samuel chapter 31. Then the Philistines found him, dismembered him, and took different body parts to different Philistine cities as trophies. Some of the men from Jabesh Gilead came, got all those pieces of Saul, and then burned them and buried the bones under a tree, so that the Philistines would stop abusing and disrespecting his corpse then. So I say this with the patriarchs, embalming was there, but it was atypical. It's the same thing with cremation. It existed, but very atypical then. The bottom line in all this, just to wrap up, the Lord can and will resurrect every body on the last day, no matter how you are interred, dust or ashes. Revelation chapter 20, verse 13 says that the sea gave up its dead that were in it. So if God can raise up people who have died at sea and have thus been scattered from where they were all over the globe, he can certainly raise up our bodies in whatever state we put them in the ground. It's not a sin to cremate your deceased one or yourself. Your deceased loved one or yourself. Cremation does not necessarily have to undermine the teaching of the resurrection of the body, nor is it any more disrespectful than the modern embalming practices that we use right now. Ultimately, Scripture lays down no command, therefore we ought not to lay down any command on how we deal with our dead. The important thing is, when dealing with our dead, as we do it in respect for the body, and also then, as Paul says in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, that we mourn not as unbelievers do, but that we mourn in hope. And that hope is that as Christ is risen from the grave with a glorious body, never to die again, so all who believe the gospel will be raised on the last day to an everlasting life with glorified bodies, much like the way Christ was raised with a glorified body. So that's cremation or burial. If you've got questions that you would like to ask, shoot me an email, atpholycross@gmail.com, atpholycross, all one word, @gmail.com. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and we'll see you next time.